I almost didn't stop that night. Almost. But something on the sidewalk froze me in place. A woman, shivering, curled into herself, invisible to everyone else but impossible to ignore. I was 35, a billionaire by the world's standards. Yet nothing I owned could fix the emptiness inside me. Money can buy silence, comfort, and control, but it cannot silence your own thoughts. That night, I wasn't driving for work or meetings. I was driving because going home felt heavier than staying on the road. My apartment was huge, quiet, and empty, echoing back every thought I tried to ignore. The city outside felt safer than the space inside my own mind. She was sitting on the sidewalk near a broken bus stop bench. Her body was curled inward, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she were trying to disappear into her own skin. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't looking at cars. She was just there, still, silent, and painfully small against the dark street. She had no coat, no shoes. Her hair was messy, and her face was red from the cold. I slowed down without realizing it. Normally, I didn't do that. I had passed people like her countless times. I had learned how to look straight ahead, how to tell myself that someone else would help, how to keep driving and forget what I saw within seconds. That skill came easily after years of focusing only on deals, numbers, and results. Feelings were inefficient. Pausing was dangerous. Caring slowed you down. But this time, my hands froze on the steering wheel. Something about the way she held herself felt different. It wasn't just poverty or homelessness. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes when someone has been invisible for too long. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, a quiet voice saying that if I didn't stop now, this moment would stay with me longer than any bad investment ever had. I pulled over. The engine kept running as I sat there, staring at my hands, wondering why I had stopped and what I was supposed to do next. I didn't know her. I didn't know her anything. And yet, for the first time in years, walking away felt impossible. I had no idea that this small decision, made on a cold and silent street, would tear apart the life I thought I understood and slowly build something entirely new in its place. If this story already touched something inside you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find these stories. And if you feel comfortable, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. None of us are truly alone, even when it feels that way. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. The cold hit me harder than I expected, sharp and immediate, like the night was warning me to go back inside. My shoes touched the wet pavement, and for a second I wondered how long she had been sitting there without moving. She noticed me then, slowly lifting her head, her eyes wide with fear before I even said a word. That look stopped me. It wasn't anger or suspicion. It was the look of someone who had learned to expect nothing good from strangers. I raised my hands slightly, trying to look less threatening, suddenly aware of how different our worlds were even though we stood on the same street. I told her I didn't want anything from her. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, softer than the one I used in boardrooms and negotiations. She didn't answer at first. She just watched me, as if waiting for the moment I would change my mind and walk away like everyone else. Up close, I could see how tired she was, not just physically but in a deeper way. Her lips were cracked from the cold, her hands shaking as she pressed them together for warmth. She looked older than she probably was, not because of age, but because life had clearly been unkind to her. I asked her if she was hurt, if she needed medical help. She shook her head slowly, her eyes never leaving my face. I offered her my coat without thinking. It was expensive, something I had bought without checking the price. She hesitated, staring at it as if it might disappear. When she finally took it, her shoulders relaxed just a little, and that small movement felt heavier than any thank you. She wrapped it around herself and whispered a quiet thanks, so soft I almost missed it. I asked her name. She said it, then quickly looked away, like sharing even that felt risky. I told her mine. Not the name people recognized from magazines or headlines, just my first name. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the city far away, the night holding us inside its quiet space. I realized how rarely I stood still with another human being without an agenda. I asked her where she was staying. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. She told me she stayed wherever the night allowed her to. Some nights it was a shelter, some nights a doorway, some nights nowhere at all. She said it like she was talking about the weather, as if this uncertainty had become normal. That hurt more than anything else she could have said. Something inside me shifted. I felt uncomfortable, not because of her, but because of myself. I had built an entire life around avoiding discomfort, around controlling every variable. And yet here I was, standing in front of someone whose life had no safety net at all. I asked her if she was hungry. She nodded, this time without hesitation. As we walked toward my car, I felt a strange fear. Not fear of danger, but fear of responsibility. Once you stop, once you listen, you can't pretend you didn't see. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment where my carefully managed distance from the world finally broke. And there was no turning back. We got into my car, and I started the engine again, careful to keep the atmosphere neutral. I didn't know what to say, and she didn't seem ready to speak either. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable. For the first time in a long time, I noticed that silence can feel like a bridge rather than a wall. I kept glancing at her, noticing the little details. The way her fingers kept fidgeting with the edges of the coat, the faint scar on her wrist, and the shadows under her eyes that told stories no one had bothered to ask about. Finally, she spoke, almost like testing the waters. She said her name was Claire. The name was ordinary, but there was nothing ordinary about the way she carried herself. Every word was measured, every pause deliberate. I could tell she had learned early that speaking carelessly had consequences she couldn't afford. I nodded, pretending to be interested in the smallest details, because in that moment, I realized that listening might be the only way I could reach her. I asked if she wanted to get something warm to eat. She hesitated, glancing out the window like the idea of sitting in a restaurant was both thrilling and terrifying. She finally agreed, and we drove to a small diner that was still open. Inside, she seemed almost amazed by the fluorescent lights, the smell of coffee, and the sight of people sitting together, talking freely. She didn't ask questions about me, and I didn't offer unnecessary explanations. I simply watched her reclaiming small pieces of normalcy that the world had denied her for too long. Over coffee and sandwiches, she began to tell me fragments of her life, carefully pieced together like a puzzle she wasn't sure she could finish. She had grown up in a small town, raised by parents who never taught her how to trust anyone outside their home. After high school, she moved to the city to escape, but things hadn't gone as planned. Jobs disappeared, apartments fell through, and slowly, the world chipped away at her confidence. She had been close to giving up completely until the night she ended up on the streets. She didn't ask for pity. She didn't want my charity. She simply wanted someone to see her, to acknowledge that she existed. And for the first time in years, someone did. As she spoke, I felt a weight pressing on my chest. I had built a life full of comfort and recognition, yet I had never been tested like this. I was used to solving problems with money, influence, or connections. But this wasn't a deal, a business challenge, or a negotiation. This was life. Raw, messy, and unfiltered. Every story she shared forced me to confront my own failures in ways I hadn't expected. The truth was that no amount of wealth could insulate me from the human truths staring me in the face. By the time we left the diner, it was past midnight. The city felt different, quieter, softer somehow. Claire seemed lighter too, as if recounting her past had temporarily eased the burden she carried on her shoulders. I offered to drive her to a shelter for the night, and she nodded silently. On the way, she looked out the window, lost in thought, and I found myself imagining the years that had led her to this point. I thought about how fragile people's lives can be, and how easily they can be overlooked, forgotten, or dismissed. I also realized something unsettling about myself. I had spent years building a fortress around my life, only to find it empty when confronted with someone else's vulnerability. By the time we arrived, I knew that helping her wouldn't be a simple act. It wasn't about writing a check or providing a temporary solution. I had to be present, involved, and willing to see the uncomfortable truth of someone else's suffering. I also knew that the night was far from over. Something about Claire's story had awakened a responsibility in me that I couldn't ignore. I didn't know how far this path would go, or what it would cost me, but for the first time in my life, I felt like stepping into uncertainty was worth it. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, restless and replaying every detail from the night before. Something about Claire's story kept gnawing at me. I had driven her to a shelter, left her there safely, and yet a part of me couldn't let it go. I was a man used to control, to knowing the outcome of every decision, but this situation felt like walking blind into a storm. Later that day, I found myself checking files at work that I hadn't touched in years, just to distract myself from thinking about her. That's when I noticed a name in a document buried under contracts and acquisitions. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then I realized it was Claire. Not the Claire I met last night, but someone connected to a deal I had signed years ago. A deal that had caused her family to lose everything. A company I had invested in had indirectly ruined her life, pushed her into poverty without my ever knowing. My stomach dropped, and my hands shook as I read the details. Couldn't believe it. I had unknowingly played a role in the very circumstances that forced her onto the streets. Every decision I had made with confidence and ambition had contributed to her suffering, and I hadn't even realized it. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, my heart heavy. Guilt, shame, and an urgent desire to make things right collided inside me in a way I had never experienced before. I had always considered myself a good man, generous even, but this revelation tore that self-image apart. By the time I called her that afternoon, my voice sounded foreign to me. I couldn't hide the tremor as I admitted the truth. I told her about the connection, about how a decision I had made years ago had affected her life, and I apologized. For the first time in years, I felt completely exposed, vulnerable in front of another person. Claire listened quietly, her eyes soft but wary. I expected anger, a refusal to speak to me again, but instead, she said nothing. She just nodded slowly, letting me finish. Her silence was heavier than any words could have been. I offered her more than a simple apology. I offered to help her rebuild what had been lost. But she hesitated. She didn't want charity. She wanted dignity. That's when I realized that helping her would not be a transaction, not something I could fix with my wealth alone. She needed someone who could stand with her, who could fight alongside her rather than for her. And I was determined to be that person, even if it meant stepping completely out of my comfort zone. Later that evening, I drove to meet her again. We talked about her plans, her dreams, and what she wanted for the future. Every word she spoke reminded me of the resilience and strength I had overlooked in my own life. It was clear that she had survived everything the world threw at her without losing her humanity. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Sometimes the people we think need saving end up saving us instead. By the time I left that night, I felt a strange mix of hope and dread. The connection between us was no longer accidental. The events of that night, the decisions of my past, and the reality of her present had created a bond neither of us could ignore. I had entered her life to help, but she had already changed mine. And the question that kept me awake was no longer what I could do for her, but whether I could ever atone for what I had unknowingly taken. The days that followed were unlike anything I had ever experienced. I wasn't used to being needed in ways that money alone couldn't satisfy. Claire and I began meeting regularly, and each encounter revealed a new layer of her struggles. She had survived countless nights without food, warmth, or safety, and yet she refused to let the world break her completely. But there were moments when the weight of it all became too much, and suddenly, I understood that my presence could make the difference between despair and survival. One evening, she called me in panic. Her voice was shaking, and I could hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Someone had been following her, threatening her for reasons I didn't yet understand. I rushed out of my apartment and found her crouched in a narrow alley, her coat torn, eyes wide with fear. The city felt suddenly hostile, full of shadows I had ignored for so long. Without hesitation, I took her hand and led her to my car, ignoring the stares of strangers. She held on tightly, and I could feel her trembling through my grip. As we drove, She told me about the people who had been harassing her. They were remnants of a life she had once known, people who had taken advantage of her vulnerability. I listened, taking note of every detail. I realized that helping her wasn't just about temporary shelter or food. It was about creating a network of protection, a plan that could prevent the past from repeating itself. I made calls, arranged for safe housing, and even contacted old colleagues who owed me favors, all in the effort to keep her out of harm's way. Claire was reluctant to accept help. She had been let down so many times before that trusting anyone, especially someone with as much power as I had, felt impossible. But slowly, she began to lean on me. We spent hours talking about her dreams. Small things like a job that didn't humiliate her, a place to sleep without fear, and the hope that she could one day leave the streets behind. It hit me that, for the first time in years, I wasn't doing something to control or impress someone else. I was doing something because it mattered, because it was human. One night, we found ourselves sitting on the steps of a quiet park. She looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability that left me speechless. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. I shook my head. "I want to," I said, "because someone once needed me to see them too, and I ignored it. I won't make that mistake again." She smiled faintly, but it was a smile that carried the weight of years of survival. In that moment, I understood the paradox. By helping her, I was being saved as much as she was. As the weeks passed, Claire began to regain some stability. She found a small apartment, started part-time work, and slowly rebuilt the confidence that had been stripped away. Watching her reclaim her life was humbling. I had never experienced anything like this in boardrooms or luxury hotels. Power felt meaningless when compared to the trust and courage of someone fighting to survive. And yet, I knew there were still shadows we hadn't faced, challenges that could undo everything if we weren't careful. That night, as I drove home alone, I realized that helping Claire had uncovered something I had buried for decades. The part of me that had longed for connection, for meaning beyond numbers and contracts. I had thought I was untouchable, invincible in my fortress of wealth. But Claire's life had reminded me that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was to care. After weeks of helping Claire, I started noticing cracks in my own carefully constructed life. My office, once a place of triumph and control, began to feel suffocating. The meetings, the endless phone calls, the deals that once thrilled me, all of it suddenly seemed hollow. I realized I had spent decades chasing numbers, accolades, and influence, yet the very thing I had neglected, the human connection, was staring me in the face through Claire's story. Each time I saw her smile, each time she laughed without fear for a moment, I was confronted with the emptiness that surrounded me. I began questioning everything I had built and whether any of it mattered if I couldn't make a difference in the lives of those who truly needed it. One morning, I walked through my penthouse apartment, touching objects I had collected over the years, things I thought defined me. Expensive art, rare books, high-end technology. And yet, none of it inspired me anymore. I realized that I had become a prisoner of my own success, bound by routines and habits that offered comfort but no fulfillment. I had created a life that looked perfect on the outside, but inside, it was barren. The contrast between my empty existence and Claire's resilience was unbearable. She had survived far more than I could imagine, with nothing but grit and determination. And here I was, drowning in luxury and self-imposed isolation. Late one night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the city lights outside, and felt a wave of despair wash over me. For the first time, I confronted the fear I had buried for years, that all the power and money in the world could not shield me from loneliness. I had thought I was untouchable, that I could always control my environment and outcomes. But vulnerability isn't something you can buy. It's something you face, sometimes violently, sometimes slowly, and always uncomfortably. And Claire had forced me to face it. Her courage had become a mirror reflecting my own inadequacies, my own fears, and my own failings. I started replaying moments from my past, long-forgotten decisions, relationships I had neglected, people I had dismissed. Memories surfaced of family dinners missed for deals, friends lost to ambition, promises broken without a second thought. I felt a gnawing guilt that I couldn't escape, a realization that my life, though outwardly enviable, had been largely hollow because I had failed to nurture the bonds that truly mattered. I had been living in a bubble of comfort and recognition while the world outside, and people like Claire, were left to struggle against forces they could never control. The contrast was brutal, unavoidable, and deeply humbling. The emptiness became more tangible with each day. I found myself staring at the phone, realizing that I hadn't spoken sincerely to anyone in months, years even. Conversations at work were transactional. Interactions with family were perfunctory. Even my closest colleagues were mere extensions of my business, not real connections. The recognition and praise I had accumulated felt meaningless when compared to the genuine gratitude I witnessed in Claire's eyes. That simple, human acknowledgement held more weight than any award, any title, any fortune. It was a truth I could no longer ignore. Life without meaning is survival, not living. I spent hours reflecting on what I could do to reconcile this emptiness. The thought of abandoning Claire, leaving her to face the world alone again, was unbearable. Yet I also understood that my involvement had to be authentic and sustained, not superficial or performative. I had to face my own inadequacies while helping her rebuild hers. That night, I made a silent vow to myself. I would confront my failures, I would learn what it meant to truly care, and I would not let fear or pride dictate my actions. I had no idea how painful or challenging that journey would be, but for the first time, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Claire's survival had become intertwined with my awakening, and I realized that by helping her, I was forcing myself to confront the man I had been and the man I could become. Weeks passed, and slowly the small victories began to appear. Claire had found a modest apartment, a place that smelled faintly of cleaning products and fresh paint, a stark contrast to the cold streets she had slept on. Seeing her cross the threshold and breathe deeply for the first time in years filled me with an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. It was fragile and tentative, like the first cracks of sunlight after a long night, but it existed. For the first time, I realized that transformation doesn't happen overnight. It comes in small moments, in incremental steps, and in the courage to keep moving forward despite fear. I watched her start a new job, a position that offered stability and dignity, not charity. She called me sometimes, just to share small triumphs. A paycheck that covered more than just rent, a friendly conversation with a colleague, a meal she cooked herself. Each of these moments reminded me that resilience is often invisible, and yet it shapes the course of lives in ways no wealth or fame ever could. I felt honored to witness her reclaiming herself, but I also understood that my role was not to rescue her. It was to support, to stand beside, and to offer guidance when needed. She had taught me that true help is never about control. It's about presence and respect. As Claire rebuilt her life, I began to rebuild my own. I scaled back unnecessary work commitments, spent more time with people I cared about, and allowed myself to experience emotions I had long suppressed. I learned to listen without judgment, to act without expectation, and to give without seeking recognition. The emptiness that had haunted me for so long began to fade, replaced by a quiet sense of fulfillment I hadn't known existed. I realized that my wealth had been a shield, but compassion became a bridge. I discovered that being human meant being vulnerable, and that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than weakness. One evening, we sat on a bench in a park near her apartment. The city lights reflected in the river, soft and steady, and Claire leaned back with a contented sigh. She looked at me, eyes bright and unguarded, and for the first time, I saw a version of her that was free from fear. "I can't believe how far I've come," she said, and I nodded, feeling the weight of everything we had endured. It wasn't just her journey. It was ours. The connection we had formed was no longer defined by the past, by mistakes or misfortune. It was defined by resilience, trust, and the courage to face life together. I thought back to that night when I first saw her on the sidewalk. If I hadn't stopped, if I had driven past as I always did, none of this would have happened. And yet, it wasn't about heroism or grandeur. It was about noticing, about choosing to act in a world where so many choose to look away. Claire had survived without me, but together, we discovered that survival could be transformed into life, hope, and purpose. She had taught me that sometimes the act of helping another person can heal wounds you didn't even know existed within yourself. By the time winter arrived, her apartment was warm, filled with books, plants, and laughter. She had friends who visited, a small community that offered safety and companionship. And I had learned to slow down, to cherish the moments that truly mattered, and to measure success by the lives you touch rather than the numbers on a screen. The transformation was profound, and it wasn't just hers, it was mine. We had both been changed by a single night, by a single choice to stop, notice, and act. And in that realization, I found a peace I had never thought possible. Life after that night was different in ways I could never have predicted. The routine of my old life, the endless meetings, the constant pressure, the hollow celebrations, no longer held the same meaning. I still managed businesses and made decisions that mattered in the financial world, but my perspective had shifted. I realized that wealth and success are fleeting if they aren't paired with empathy, with awareness of the people whose lives intersect with yours. Each day became an opportunity to pay attention, to notice what really matters, and to act when action could change a life. Claire and I continued to meet, but the relationship wasn't about dependence. It was about mutual respect, shared humanity, and the quiet understanding that each of us had been shaped by hardship and growth. I watched her flourish, not just because I helped her, but because she found her own strength and determination. Witnessing her journey reminded me that the human spirit is far more resilient than we often give it credit for. It reminded me that the moments we think are small, choosing to stop, offering kindness, listening without judgment, can have an impact far beyond what we imagine. I began applying the same lessons to myself. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, spent time with family without distraction, and allowed myself to experience joy without guilt. I noticed the little things. The way sunlight hit the city skyline, the laughter of strangers in a park, the quiet satisfaction of completing work that genuinely helped someone. Life became less about accumulation and more about presence. I understood that fulfillment is not a product of wealth or control, but of connection and compassion. I also started sharing my experiences with others. In meetings, I reminded my colleagues that decisions affect real people, often in ways we never see. I became more patient, more willing to listen, and less eager to dismiss problems as insignificant. Helping Claire had taught me that empathy is a skill, a habit, and a responsibility. It's a choice we make every day. And each time I chose it, I felt more grounded, more alive, more human. Some nights, when the city was quiet and I was driving home, I would think of that night on the sidewalk and the countless moments since then that had shaped both of us. I realized that life is fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes harsh, but it is also full of opportunities to make a difference, to reach out, to see someone, and to act. None of us are truly alone, even when we feel isolated. There is always a chance to connect, to change, to heal, if we are willing to step beyond our comfort zone and care. I learned that helping someone is not about creating dependency. It's about unlocking potential. Claire didn't need me to survive. She needed someone to remind her that she mattered. And in doing that, I discovered a life I had been missing. One filled with purpose, gratitude, and hope. The city still had its dark corners, the world its unfairness, but I no longer felt powerless. I felt awake, present, and ready to face whatever challenges came next, knowing that small acts of humanity could ripple far beyond what we can see. Every morning now, I wake up with intention. I listen more than I speak. I act with awareness rather than routine. And sometimes, in those quiet moments, I realize that life's greatest rewards are not measured in money or influence, but in the lives we touch, the hearts we honor, and the courage we find within ourselves. Looking back now, I realize that one night changed everything. A single moment, a simple choice to stop and see someone, became the turning point of my life. Claire's presence taught me more than any boardroom ever could. I learned that true strength is not measured by wealth or influence, but by our willingness to face discomfort, to acknowledge suffering, and to act when action can heal. Life is unpredictable, often unfair, and sometimes overwhelming, but it is in those moments that we discover who we really are. Claire has flourished. She walks with confidence now, her smile radiant, her laughter unguarded. Watching her reclaim her life reminds me daily that resilience exists in every person, waiting to be noticed, supported, and celebrated. But I also learned that the journey isn't just hers. It became mine as well. By being present, by caring without expectation, I found meaning and fulfillment I had long thought impossible. The emptiness that once defined my life has been replaced with purpose, gratitude, and connection. I want you, whoever is listening to this story, to know that none of us are truly alone. The world is filled with people facing struggles invisible to most eyes. Sometimes, the smallest acts, pausing, listening, offering kindness, can ripple far beyond our imagination. You have the power to make a difference, to change someone's life, and even to change your own. It doesn't require fame, money, or influence. It requires attention, courage, and the choice to act when it matters most. If this story has moved you even a little, I'd love for you to join our community. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so more people can hear stories like this. And leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Sharing your thoughts reminds all of us that, even in a vast world, connections are possible. Your presence, your acknowledgement, and your care matter just as much as any heroic act. As I end this story, I want you to remember one thing. The world can feel heavy, lonely, and chaotic, but hope exists in small, tangible actions. Reach out when you see someone struggling. Listen when someone speaks quietly. Offer help even if it feels inconvenient. The rewards are unexpected and profound. You may not realize it, but by helping someone else, you may end up saving yourself in ways you never imagined. I drive past that street occasionally, thinking about the night that started it all. I smile because I know that life is not measured by what you have, but by what you give, what you notice, and how fully you choose to live. Claire's journey reminds me, every day, that we are stronger together, that empathy is a superpower, and that even the smallest choice to act can ripple into a lifetime of change. So, go out there, notice the unseen, care without expectation, and never underestimate the difference a single choice can make. Life is waiting for those who dare to see, and it is richer for every act of genuine humanity.